What's up guys, Hello Football Talk here. We've reached the end of this extensive 8-piece video series that I put out every year, where I talk about all 32 franchises in detail through the lens of the NFL draft, breaking down every single player they selected, how it relates to any other moves they might have made this offseason, trying to make sense of how those front offices approached things and add my thoughts. For each team, once I'm done with the individual player profiles, I try to summarize what I liked about how they handle things, maybe some things I disagreed with, and what it all means, before at the end of the video, I stack up the 4 teams in each division against one another. This is the final time you'll hear me say this. If there are 2 to 3 names I didn't get to in my evaluations, I'll just quickly share some meaningful things on the surface, but won't rely on anyone else's thoughts in those cases. There's plenty to talk about. Please bear in mind that I'm recording this a week in advance, in case anything major happens in the meantime. One quick reminder, if this is your first time here, welcome. If you enjoy the analysis, please become part of the channel by simply clicking the subscribe button, and any likes, comments, whatever, I greatly appreciate it. Once we're done here, you'll be able to find my thoughts on every single franchise with timestamps by division. I created a playlist for the series, and I'll have you covered all off-season, here as well as on my website, hellotofootballtalk.com. Links for all of that and my social media channels are in the video description. So one more time, let's get into it with the AFC West, and the first team up is the Denver Broncos, who in round 1, 20th overall, selected Jody Barron, the cornerback out of Texas, second round 60th overall RJ Harvey, running back UCF, a couple of third rounders, 74th overall Pat Bryant, wide receiver Illinois, and 101st Savion Jones, edge/interior D lineman LSU, then in the 4th round 134th overall K Robinson, edge defender Alabama, 6th round 216th Jeremy Crawshaw, punter Florida, and then in the 7th round 241st overall Caleb Lohner, tight end Utah. The Broncos were basically mocked by everyone to either draft a running back or tight end as Sean Payton's joker, but instead they went back to a defense that just finished at the top of the league in almost all the major statistical categories, with Jody Barron from Texas on the shorter end at 5'11", 190 pounds, but super feisty and technically sound in most areas, and his tape last season was about as good as anyone's at the position. He displays outstanding route anticipation and seems to be right in sync as receivers set up their breaks, managing space to the sideline, and by running a 4.39 at the combine, the speed concerns some people had with him were largely mitigated. Barron shows excellent awareness in zone coverage and positions himself accordingly to the concept, using body language to discourage quarterbacks from certain throws, keying where they want to go, and then he has an uncanny ability to pray for the catch point, to jar passes loose that were basically caught already. While in run defense, he takes his contain responsibility seriously, is sudden in the way he navigates around blockers, and closes down space to the ball, while having shown significant improvement as a tackler. His hand usage the few times he did get deployed in press coverage wasn't really inside the frame of pass catchers, and he could end up drawing more flags at the next level, and very much a squat and drive player in off-man assignments, rather than someone comfortable in a straight back pedal, where he has to redirect forward out of it. That's why I didn't view him as this shutdown man-to-man corner on the outside, but rather someone who can play inside and out, let his ability to key the quarterback and receiving options in his peripheral vision shine, be feisty as heck at the catch points, and involve himself against the run. He's just a really damn good secondary player added to a team that really struggled when some of the DBs got hurt last season. Nickel Jaquan McMillan being back for one more year at just over $1 million isn't going to keep you from getting the first round on the field. Riley Moss now also entering the back half of his rookie deal. This just gives you options down the road financially and alignment-wise. Then RJ Harvey from UCF, and before we get to the player, the Broncos really cashed in on the lines, wanting to move up 3 spots, but in return Denver moved up 100 spots, from 230 to 130. That's an awesome deal for them. Yet Payton still gets this kind of chess piece on offense, and someone who adds some more dynamism to that group in the 5'8", 195-pound dynamo from UCF. Kinda glides before it's time to stick his foot on the ground and shift into another gear, showing a natural feel for altering pace and stride length, while being super twitchy in congested areas, has the explosiveness to quickly punish a defense for leaving a lane open with the long speed to finish 50+ yard touchdowns, but I was shocked with his ability to bounce off hits and squirm forwards, and he can be a weapon in the screen game as well as split out wide and running basic routes, with the low center of gravity and willingness to give you some snaps in pass pro as well. Harvey was incredibly reliant on bouncing runs all the way outside because of how much faster he was than the defenders he's faced, and around the line of scrimmage you do see guys grab and hold him up quite a bit, while his route setups could be a little more efficient, and he needs to be firmer with his strike as a pass protector to stay on the field on third downs. but clearly they were happy to let Javonte Williams walk in free agency, and although they have some interesting names in the backfield, those all are role players, and now you have that ace who can eventually be an all-around player, even if you don't want his workload to be at the same level that it was in college, a fun player. Next is Pat Bryant from Illinois, a big strong receiver at 6'3", 200 pounds, who has worked as a power slot and boundary guy. He really sells the vertical push of routes, and is capable of dropping his hips pretty violently to deliver sharp breaks, before using his frame to gain access to the middle of the field and shield the ball. Consistently has his hands aligned prior to the arrival of the ball, naturally adjusts to its flight, and aggressively attacks it in the air, undeterred by defenders trying to contest him. And this is a highly competitive player after the catch, who pierces up the field and has the size to break tackles. The hand usage off the line is good, but Bryant would very much benefit from swatting away the arms of his defender, who can ride him and feel the route develop that way. And I don't see the speed to actually detach after gaining stack position on vertical routes, or pull away from pursuit consistently. A little earlier than I expected, but a very useful pass catcher, I believe, who could do some of the stuff that made Michael Thomas one of the most productive receivers in the league under Peyton. Clearly they identified a skill set that they like, and now you add him to Colton Sutton on the final season of his contract, prior to a bunch of void years, while most other guys they've spent draft picks on recently are more of these small, gadgety receivers outside of Devon Whaley, who I believe will largely be replaced in his usage by Pat. Savion Jones from LSU, who the Broncos jumped back up to the end of day 2 for, 10 spots essentially for a 6th rounder, along with moving down 4 slots in the 4th. This is a 6'6", 280-pound base D end who can line up at 5 technique for an out-front team, and overall has a body that you can sort of mold for different roles. He's a stout presence in the run game, with the ability to 2-gap as that header play over the tackle, but also showed the ability to rip through the reach of blockers and be disruptive. Happy to surrender his body and create traffic around the line of scrimmage, as he charges into moving bodies and plays with a revving motor to pursue the ball all over the field. And he creates issues for pass protectors with his combination of length and strength, who surprises with how he can reduce his surface area and get around the edges of blockers or use a high swim to free himself late. Too often Jones is a tick late off the ball and off blocks, without the short area agility to make plays when the ball is nearby as he's engaged with someone, and he still needs to work on his ability to actually step past the hip of blockers as he tries to arm over them. He was an interesting prospect because you don't really know where his best alignment is or what his future staff would ask of him. Denver has Jonathan Cooper on a pretty fresh deal, and Nick Bonito was a borderline all-pro performer for them last year on the edges. Zach Allen is a more traditional 5 technique, so maybe Jones on base downs is going to replace John Franklin Myers to a large extent, and then on a few sub-packages, you use his ability to cave in one side, and put both your outside backers on the same side, where you loop someone all the way across. That's going to be interesting to watch. But Denver did add one more of your typical designated pass rushers off the edge to start day 3, and K. Robinson from Alabama, who had to keep working for opportunities by being a standard on special teams, and then missed a large stretch of this past season when he had finally become a full-time contributor on defense after all those great Bama edges had gone to the NFL. He sets the edge with adequate leverage, jolt in his hands, and great extension of those 33.5-inch arms, times up and jumps the snap with great burst, and then has the ankle flexibility to turn the corner, reach out his inside arm, and tomahawk the ball out of the quarterback's hand. Yet he also impresses with the power to create vertical displacement against guys getting tall, trying to mirror lateral movements, where at 245 pounds, he has a couple of dominant reps running through tackles. Like I said, definitely more of a designated pass rusher who tries to maintain a square base, but can't get bumped laterally as blockers apply rotational force to his near shoulder in the run game, and he doesn't yet access secondary hand counters if opponents win the initial interaction and gain positioning inside his frame in passing situations. Good luck if you get into 3rd and long against them as a quarterback. These last two I didn't evaluate individually, first with a punter in Jeremy Crawshaw from Florida. Him or the Alabama guy, who the Saints picked up as an undrafted free agent, were considered pretty clearly the top 2 punters in the class, which, if you know me, I don't love drafting specialists, especially since the other guy in that tier didn't require a pick, and the Broncos could have instead taken another shot on the O-line maybe, but it's not like this roster really needed that much help anymore. From what I understand, not the greatest hang time, but I remember him showing great touch, and he pinned a few opponents deep from my recollection in games, top 15 in average for the FBS still anyway. And Caleb Lohner from Utah is a massive tight end who barely ever saw the field on the gridiron, probably since he had another guy I like quite a bit as a potential move piece, even though I expected him to probably go undrafted based on age and size, which is Brent Keefe. But Lohner at 6'7", nearly 260 pounds, only 57 career snaps at football, but a stand-up basketball player whose 4 catches last year all resulted in touchdowns, and he can be a weapon posting up in the red zone. Another developmental pet project for Peyton and company, I guess, after they signed Evan Ingram as a free agent, but the only other established NFL player beyond that is Adam Troutman at the position. So let's see if they can bring Lona along on the practice squad. Overall, I can't say that I wasn't a bit surprised with the approach the Broncos took here. They do get Sean Payton's Joker and RJ Harvey at the end of the second round, who could add some dynamism to a pretty steady run game already, and make the play-action attack all the more effective. And Pat Bryant is a receiver whose skill sets they clearly coveted as this power slot, and someone they can use with his big frame on crosses and in-breaking routes, along with his jump ball skills. But in the first rounds, to add to the secondary, and the 2 picks in the early 200s being additional pieces to an already very strong defensive front, not necessarily what I expected, even though you saw their all-out attacking style under Vance Joseph somewhat feast on the poor and reach the limits against the top quarterbacks in the league. So they thought they'd make sure that that side of the ball can be truly dominant and takes pressure off the second-year quarterback Bo Nix to not get pushed into too many defined dropback settings. It's very much a plus game script team overall, I'd argue. Getting a punter and a tight end who has barely ever played football late, who you might have been able to just sign both as UDFAs, I don't love, but these guys clearly knew what they wanted to go for, so I don't hate it. Second, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, who did a great job of reloading the deck, I thought, after being outclassed in the Super Bowl by the Eagles, and a heavy focus on the trenches early on was the biggest piece of it. So in round 1, 32nd overall Josh Simmons, offensive tackle Ohio State, 2nd round 63rd, Omar Norman-Lott, interior D lineman Tennessee, then 2 third-rounders, 66th overall Ashton Gelati, edge defender Louisville, and 85th Noel Williams, cornerback Cal, then in the 4th round 133rd overall Jalen Royals, wide receiver Utah State, 5th round 156th overall Jeffrey Bassa, linebacker Oregon, and then in the 7th round 228th overall Brashard Smith, running back from SMU. Josh Simmons was my number 2 offensive tackle in the class, and someone whose tape over the first half of last season was about as good as anyone's until he suffered a torn patella tendon, but he actually did some on-field work already at the Buckeyes Pro Day, and I thought there was a chance he'd go a lot earlier. Based on the positive reporting about his recovery, he's explosive off the ball and wants to finish blocks in the run game with great flexibility to keep his mitts connected on challenging angles, with his body contorted on zone concepts, and Ohio State weaponized his athleticism more this past season, pulling out to the corner. He understands who he's facing as a pass protector and how to cut off the angle for guys from different alignments, without making himself vulnerable against these wide rushers who have a runway into contact. His hands are constantly moving, and he's looking to create optimal settings for himself to take care of his assignments, showing balance in the way he deciphers and transitions on various games. He still has room to improve his upper body strength to create knockback on contact and not lunge as much as a run blocker at times. And he does make his chest accessible to power rushers without the stopping power to truly neutralize those guys. So he's not perfect at this point, and is coming off a substantial injury, but even with that, I thought he might go somewhere in the teens. This could end up being a massive steal for KC with the final pick of round 1, even after acquiring an extra 4th rounder from the team that just cost him a championship in the Eagles to swap spots and solve the left tackle situation, where they just handed former 49ers backup Jalen Moore a pretty massive deal, considering everything he was asked to do previously. But when this guy's healthy, he's starting right away, and maybe move Moore to left guard to compete with last year's 2nd rounder Kingsley Suamataia, or at worst you have a great backup. In round 2, Omar Norman-Lott from Tennessee is a super explosive playmaker on the interior D-line, who oddly saw the field for pretty limited stretches, despite the impact he provided on the snaps he did receive. Offers big time juice off the ball to be a terror as a penetrating free technique at 6'3", 280 pounds, past that explosive first step with the natural force to squeeze through contact, slanting across gaps in the run pass game, paired with tremendous range to run on the ball when it goes wide. And not only does he bring great lateral agility to pull off crossface moves, but he has a way with forklifting protectors and controlling the wrists to never make them comfortable in dropback settings. Norman-Lott only logged 168 snaps in run defense over the past 2 seasons combined, as the Vols already understood his primary value coming on passing downs, as he's overeager to shoot his gap and double teams can wash him out of it, and he needs that transition from run defense to pass rush on play action to click a little quicker, along with swatting away those initial stabs into his chest. The Chiefs allowed Derek Nnadi and Tershawn Wharton to walk in free agency, so they definitely needed to reload around Chris Jones. This isn't necessarily the guy they'd typically pair him up with, and they like to use Jones on the edge quite a bit altogether if they have a favorable matchup for him there, but I'll be interested if they feel like they can boost Norman Lott's snaps, to some degree at least, and he can really be a force on passing downs, since otherwise he's not really the type of guy that Spags typically likes inside on early downs, where it's more about gap control. And they go back to the D-line on the edge with Ashton Gelati from Louisville, who's very much in the mold of what they typically covered in these oversized, strong D-ends. This guy is thickly built at not even quite 6'3", but 270 pounds, and shows the tricep strength to extend and stand up blockers on the spot. Then as the play is going away from him, Gelati has the force to rip through the opposite arm and create angles to the ball for himself in order to not get sealed away from the action. While in passing settings, he packs a lot of violence in those paws to shorten the arc for himself with the long arm or hit a quick inside swim as tackles dip their head into contact. He has room to become more of a playmaker, deconstructing blocks and getting his hands on the ball carrier rather than creating vertical displacement and just pushing people into piles. And he leaves you wanting more in terms of his juice in his get-off, and doesn't have to snap in his hips or flexion his ankles to really bend the corner. For me, I never quite saw what other people did with Gelati, since I thought there were other guys with this type of profile who I preferred, and even though he presents a fairly high floor, I viewed him as a rotational piece primarily on rundowns. I had to remind myself that they did bring back Charles Omenihu for 1 more year, but then after that, they have several contracts to figure out. The other third rounder, Noah Williams from Cal, who Kansas City clearly were big fans of, as they sent the 2026 fourth rounder to the Patriots in order to move up 10 spots here. Long, scrappy boundary corner at 6'1", 200 pounds, who can land some forceful one-handed strikes and deny vertical stacking, as well as take away space to the sideline. Showcases good instincts and eye balance as a zone defender, while coming up against shallow completions under control and twisting guys to the ground with great success. And more often than not, is the one having inside position with his hands and arms locked out, dealing with receivers tasked with blocking him. He's rather clunky in his lateral transitions, allowing too many easy completions on quick breaking routes if he doesn't put his hands on the receiver, where you also see him cross over his legs. And he was penalized 15 times over the last few years, as someone who can definitely get a little too grabby. One of those guys who'll need to put on boxing gloves during his first training camp and figure out what he can get away with in the NFL, but you'd rather teach him to be less aggressive, especially for how Spags wants to operate, going back to 2023, when he had L'Jarius Sneed as that other outside corner. Trent McDuffie is a star, but you at least want the option to deploy him some in the slot in certain matchups, and this could help out in that way. Then in the fourth, Jalen Wallace, the Utah State wide receiver, who I did not think would slip out of day 2 with his physical and production profile. He keeps opponents off balance with varied footwork at the line to dictate terms to them, and deploys some well-timed 200 swipes to elude jams. He snatches passes away from his frame of strong hands catches, tracks the ball with great focus, and makes some excellent last-second adjustments. And then I thought he could access another gear with the ball in his hands, running through the catch, and having the balance to slide out loose wraps. He lacks that top gear to really threaten defenders with his vertical prowess, and then isn't violent enough snapping off routes to create substantial separation from those top flight cover guys, and you notice him bending off the wrong foot and running off his brakes in a way that tips off DBs. That's something he'll need to clean up with how tight the margins are in the NFL, but the yak skills made him a very intriguing pass catcher in this class. The Chiefs needed to add one more guy anyway, and if Rashee Rice ends up missing any extended period of time due to an incoming suspension, Ross can do a lot of the same things instead of using the undersized Xavier Worthy as the first runner last year in the capacity. Jeffrey Bauser from Oregon was one of my favorite linebackers in the class, 6'1", 230 pounds. If he sees a lane open up on the front side, he'll hit it in a hurry, and he rarely ever allows interior alignment to get this place at shoulder on lateral concepts. Highly active communicator and zone coverage, with the spatial awareness to position himself between multiple eligibles in the pattern, and the pop in his hands to disrupt them during their routes. Shoots downhill like a missile when used as an inside blitzer, where he's regularly able to slice through one shoulder of the guy supposed to pick it up with the rip move. He blindly trails pulling guards from the backside at times, opening up quick cutback lanes as a result. And as patient as Bauser is in coverage, with opening up with vertical stems, he tends to bump out too far with running backs, releasing outside the tackle, and surrenders easy access to the middle of the field on something like an angle or Texas route. Opinions were kind of split on Bauser among the people that I respect in the space. Personally, I thought he had the potential to be an energetic, rangy three-down player who could start right away next to Nick Bolton if things click for him, especially since they like to deploy Leo Chanel as this hybrid player who also drops down to the line of scrimmage, and they play plenty of base anyway. And to close things out, Brashard Smith, the SMU running back, who the Chiefs moved 2 of the final 7 selections of this draft for, handing those over to the Patriots. For a sub-200-pound one-year running back, transitioning from the gadgety wide receiver role at Miami, Smith's willingness to run between the tackles is commendable. He's light on his feet, makes shifts to his track without delay, and he has the suddenness to make people miss in space, as well as the sub 4.4 speed to go the distance. Smith shows the wiggle to separate from linebackers underneath, but also has the wheels to run by them if put in isolated situations. He's too quick in his approach to blockers in a way that forces him to truly work around them, if not bump into them altogether. And as a receiver previously, you saw some choppy steps near the top of the route that limited his effectiveness as a separator. I really thought the Chiefs would add this pass-catching, more explosive running back profile on day 3, and threw out Delaware's Marcus Yarns at one point, who I compared to Jared McKinnon. So this makes a lot of sense for a team with Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, and Elijah Mitchell on the roster, who lack those dynamic qualities. Altogether, I thought General Manager Brett Veach did an excellent job of securing the Chiefs the ability to climb back to the mountaintop after the Eagles pushed them off it. While some people I know closely associated to them argued that they wouldn't go O-line in round 1, I linked into a tackle in my ultimate mock draft, and they got an even better one I believe than what I had put down, even though the injury discount of course has to be taken into account. I didn't love the Ashton Jalali selection at the top of round 3, that was way early for me personally, but I know he had quite a few fans, and everything else I really liked. Norman Lott will be interesting to see which capacity to use him in, but he has game-wrecking potential. Noah Williams can be that physical bump-and-run corner they've kind of needed to add again for what Spags truly wants to do. Royals is a great yak receiver with some uncertainty at that position right now. I was a huge Vassar fan at linebacker. Let's see if he can live up to my lofty expectations. And then Smith as a change of pace pass-catching back that they had been in need of. No more notes needed. Next, we have the Las Vegas Raiders, who in round 1, 6th overall selected Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State, 2nd round 58th overall Jack Bash, wide receiver TCU, 3 third-rounders, 68th overall Darren Porter, cornerback Iowa State, and then back-to-back 98th and 99th overall Caleb Rogers, interior O-lineman Texas Tech, and Giles Grant, offensive tackle William & Mary, a couple of 4th-rounders, 108th overall Dante Thornton Jr., wide receiver Tennessee, and 105th Tonka Hemingway, interior D-lineman South Carolina, 3 6th-rounders, 180th overall JJ Pegues, interior D-lineman Ole Miss, 213th Tommy Millott, quarterback/wide receiver Montana State, and 215th Cam Miller, the quarterback out of North Dakota State, and then finally in the 7th round, 222nd overall, Cody Lindenberg, linebacker Minnesota. One of those situations where a team is linked to a player for most of the draft process, but then towards the end there's some stuff out there that it supposedly isn't going to happen, but ultimately landed Ashton Jeanty from Boise State, who in almost every other year would have won the Heisman Trophy after he finished just 27 yards short of Barry Sanders' all-time single-season rushing record and carried the Broncos to a first-round bye in the college football playoff. This is a 5'9", 210-pound pack of dynamite who runs super low and follows his track with a great feel for how to get through tightly packed areas, with creativity to create beyond that for what's there to be had. And when this guy gets into the open field, he can make people miss, but really becomes a rolling train who you need multiple bodies to simply slow down. Just his yards after contact alone last season would have led the country overall. And I think he's actually an underrated pass catcher, considering he played slot receiver until his final season of high school, looking at how easily he secures targets and how smoothly he transitions upfield. I don't believe he has truly elite start-up quickness and long speed, and he needs to do a better job of working inside out in blitz pickup, especially in full line slides, or sifting across for defenders coming off the slots. But this is one of those blue chip running back prospects, one notch down from Bijan Robinson a couple of years ago, but someone who in the right environment could challenge for the rushing title within one of his first couple of seasons. Looking at the Raiders, there's room upwards for the O-line to maximize his talent, but they did add a couple of guys who I'll get to in a second. Yet even though some people may argue this was a bit of a luxury pick for a team that just won 4 games last year, I do believe with the trade for Geno Smith and some of the other moves to bring back veterans and a handful of other additions, this team is closer than it gets credit for. So I can't blame a 73-year-old Pete Carroll too much if he believes he found his new version of Marshawn Lynch. In round 2, Jack Bash from TCU is a receiver's receiver, looking at all the skills he brings to the position as a 6'1", 250-pounder who started his career at LSU, where in his second season he outproduced 2 first-rounders from last year in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. Quickly is able to create a window for his quarterback to hit him underneath, with oily hips to whip his body around and the play strength to throw off DBs. He's a space eater against zone coverage, who's fully willing to attack the teeth of the defense and embraces multiple defenders corralling him in order to hold onto the ball with impressive contested catch outputs. And what I think they love about him is that he consistently gets more than he should after the catch, with how he immediately gets vertical and plays strong, as well as how he gets after it in the run game. You rarely see Besh get on top of and stack corners on go routes against straight man coverage or run away from pursuits, and he relies on extensive hand fighting over efficiency of the line versus press and then to detach from contact mid-route. But as I was watching his tape, even though he's not the most dynamic guy, I just appreciated his ability to get open against any type of coverage, come up with catches in traffic, fight for yardage, and put in work if the ball wasn't going his way. I don't think there's a team in this league that he could have gone to and not immediately helped them, and even though the Raiders still don't have this prototypical big-bodied outside receiver, they can do some of that stuff with Brock Bowers flexed out, while under new offensive coordinator Chip Kelly, Besh's ability to come close to the formation, take care of inside blocks, and run crossers will be greatly appreciated. Darian Porter, the Iowa State corner at the top of round 3, has a freakish athletic profile at 6'3", 195 pounds, with a 6'8" wingspan, and even though it took until his 6th year in college for him to start, as a former wide receiver recruit, he put together a highly impressive final season. He can kinda sit in his stance, put one hand on the wideout across from him, without having to lunge, and being patient with opening his hips to run with the guy down the field. Yet countless times he'd end up as the one in control of go routes and looking back for the ball, where quarterbacks didn't test him because he can secure picks with his massive catch radius. When he can be in that soft pedal on quarters and drive on stuff in front of him, the click and close ability definitely pops for his lanky build, and whether it's rallying up into the flats or stepping down against wide runs, he doesn't shy away from sticking his nose in the fan. Porter looked pretty raw with anticipating routes and staying balanced against more of these complex routes, but some of the nation's best during Senior Bowl week, and his movements can definitely feel a bit segmented with those really long legs, when he has to navigate cross releases or has to redirect forward, when he's not allowed to play with eyes in the backfield. Not a fully formed play at this point, I'd say, which isn't great considering how long he's been in college, but understanding that he switched sides of the ball and the high-level moments he's had, that's definitely an investment worth making at this point, especially for a team whose corner room basically has no proven commodities at all. That's the biggest question mark right now for them, I feel. Then to close out day 2, they made 2 selections on the O-line, which I'll kind of lump together here. First with Caleb Rogers from Texas Tech, who is a hefty tackle at 6'5", 315 pounds, with the inside flexibility and Ironman history, logging over 4,200 career snaps in 5 seasons with the Red Raiders, and not missing a single start with the latter 4 of those. Packs plenty of jolt on initial contact with heavy hands to turn bodies in the run game, but also does a great job of coming to balance on the second level. He gets stuck-footed with a wide base and activates his hips to stall bull rush attempts, while deploying some individual hand usage to stun opponents. Rogers doesn't sufficiently bend at his knees to create natural leverage in the run game, and too often slides off contact due to suboptimal hand placement. While in pass pro, he gets rather top-heavy and leads with his helmet a few times when he tries to land his punch. Meanwhile, Charles Grant from William & Mary was one of the most talented offensive linemen in the entire draft, as a former standout wrestler who didn't take up football until his junior year of high school, but ended up starting and dominating in 36 games at William & Mary. He has the balance and agility to consistently get to the playside shoulder of defenders and reach blocks, and escort the ball out to the perimeter on wide zone concepts. Grant executes scoop blocks and outrace linebackers stacked over the guards next to him on the backside regularly, but can also knock over the tackles on quick combos. While in protection, having 35-inch arms combined with the calm, light feet make it really tough for rushers to get around him as he counters different approaches. He plays very tall generally and will get rocked back in contact by physical edge setters and hard-charging linebackers early in his career. And even at his level of play, he surrendered access to his chest way too often, but got away with it and ended up hugging rushers due to how upright he was there as well. Which means neither one of them has reached their ceiling yet, even though Rogers of course has vastly more experience against a significantly higher level of competition. But this was actually slightly early for him. While I could have easily seen Grant come off the board a round earlier, I could absolutely envision Rogers starting left guard this year, and whether they decide to let Colton Miller's final year on the contract run out, or they feel like Grant can switch sides, whilst going through an NFL strength program, he'll probably start on either end of the line for them by 2026. 6 more free picks coming up, which I'll run through a little quicker here. The first one being Dante Thornton from Tennessee. There aren't a lot of 6'5", 215-pound receivers you're going to find that can run 4.3 flat and access that top gear as quickly as he does. Consistently extends for passes away from his frame, has a few tough catches with a defender on his backside, and uses his long body to stretch the ball forwards, but never established himself as a full-time contributor for the Vols and ran an extremely limited route tree, while rarely ever been required to defeat press or show much technical savvy. and not particularly creative or elusive after the catch. So a big time bet on trades with very little production, and I thought there were several more complete receivers available at that stage for a team that could use some more immediate contributors. Didn't like this a whole lot. Tonka Hemingway from South Carolina was the other former Gamecock D tackle next to TJ Sanders. 6'3", 300-pound bear in the middle of the defense with the strength to lock out and throw by blockers as the runner approaches. He flashes a pretty sudden spin move to throw at guards occasionally when rushing from the B gap, and I really like how he executes twists with timing and precision, but he needs to operate with better pad level in all phases of the game, waking it uprooted at times by double teams, and he doesn't really show the ability to contort his body and reduce the surface area for pass protectors, which they came back at the start of round 6 with J.J. Pegues from Ole Miss, who packs an extra 25 pounds and was the rock in the middle of that Rebel defense with all these talented D-linemen around him, where even with subpar technique, he could control his space and squeeze through gaps at times. He offers a pretty rapid first step to attack the pocket and quickly builds up momentum while using his hands as weapons and showing impressive reactionary skills. For as good as some of the reps for Pegues are anchoring against the run, he also gets undisciplined with his gap assignments and stands up way too much in certain reps trying to watch the ball, and he lacks counters he can reliably access as a pass rusher, too often resorting to a lackadaisical spin move that doesn't really lead anywhere. I think in combination, those guys could pretty much immediately boost the Raiders' run D, where Christian Wilkins, coming back from injury, can be more of a slicer, and they can limit his snap total to a certain degree to keep him fresh. They were pretty thin on the interior D-line, and if you swap those two names, I would have actually felt better about it. Then two quarterbacks who actually faced off against each other in the most recent FCS championship game, although this first one was actually announced as a receiver in Tommy Millard from Montana State. Maybe the fastest quarterback I've ever watched, who is incredibly tough for being 6 foot, 205 pounds, but it's his ability to win the corner and outrace pursuit that blows you away, and then he has quite the arm to deliver tight spirals, fires balls in between converging defenders, but can also lay throws aptly. Very much a one-read-and-go quarterback at this point, who double clutches quite a bit when he can't actually see the open receiver, and he felt pretty erratic inside the pocket against defenses with a quality pass rush. The twitchiness he saw in those muddy spaces is what they're probably banking on to make work some as a receiver, but probably even more so as a package player, who they can take their terms to the defense, maybe use him as a gunner or personal protector on the punt team, sort of like a smaller version of Taysom Hill, especially with how much Chip Kelly involved his quarterback at Ohio State in the designed run game last season, en route to the Natty. But then Cam Miller from North Dakota State is more of a traditional quarterback, who Tom Brady, as the new man in charge, even though they make it sound like he isn't, has officially endorsed already. Calm, consistent base to initiate his throwing motion from, capable of hitting deep outs and corner routes, with plenty of NFL-style heavy play action concepts, where he has to turn his back to the defense, works through progressions in timely fashion, being trusted with some full field reads, and has some high IQ moments by replacing the blitz to a spot where it leads his targets away from trouble. But when he's moved off the spots and gets a little lazy with his feet, that's when you see him spray the ball. Plus he benefited from clean pockets all the damn time, finishing his career with just under 3 seconds time to throw, and is a little small by NFL standards for when the walls will be closing in around him, but someone I think has at least NFL backup stuff, to where I wouldn't be worried that much if he had to jump in for a couple of games if Geno and Aiden O'Connell hurt, that he'd look completely lost up there. And lastly, Cody Lindenberg from Minnesota, a prototype Mike linebacker at 6'3", 240 pounds, what a green dot and did a bunch of communication pre-snap to get everyone aligned properly, and then he has 33-inch arms to keep blockers at bay. Instinctive mover as a middle dropper in coverage, takes appropriate angles to the football, and was actually used a handful of times per game rushing off the edge by the Gophers. Lindenberg lacks that final gear to track down speedy ball carriers on lengthy pursuit missions, and ends up clutching air when he tries to clamp down on the legs, and he shows some clunkiness in his change of direction in space due to his long legs. But not a throwaway pick by any means, someone I believe will see action on defense as a rookie if there are any injuries, with the volatility of a Devin White and a couple of thumpers ahead of him. Considering all of that, I thought the Raiders did a really good job here. We can argue if going running back at 6 was the best route for a team that just won 4 games last year, but in a draft without many blue chip talents, the only reason Genty may not have been considered one is the position that he plays. If they can hit on one of those linemen they selected at the end of round 3, they have enough in front of the rookie to challenge for the rushing title, at least on the AFC side of things, pretty much right away. Ashley is a rock-solid wide receiver 2 immediately, who can really help them in the run game and as a zone leader. Porter's a high-ceiling bet they made at the top of the 3rd to solve a corner room that lacks those proven commodities. Didn't love the Thornton pick to start day 3, but they beef up the D-line after that, might have found themselves a backup quarterback, and Lindenberg is someone who'll just get the job done if called upon, and is going to play his ass off on special teams. A very Pete Carroll-like draft, and it seems he and the new GM, John Spikettag, share the same vision for how to build this roster. Vegas maybe wasn't celebrated during draft weekend, but I think they'll quickly reap the rewards here, with some upside sprinkled in. And now, team number 32 of our Divisional Draft and Roster Review Series, the Los Angeles Chargers, who in round 1, 22nd overall selected Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina, 2nd round 55th, Trey Harris, wide receiver Ole Miss, 3rd round 86th overall, Jamari Caldwell, interior D-lineman Oregon, 4th round 125th overall, Kyle Kennard, edge defender South Carolina, a couple of 5th rounders, 158th, Keandre Lambert-Smith, wide receiver Auburn, and 165th, Oronde Gadsden II, tight end Syracuse, a pair of 6th rounders, 199th overall, Branson Taylor, offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of Pittsburgh, and 214th, RJ Mickens, safety out of Clemson, and then finally, in round 7, Triquez Bridges, the cornerback out of Florida. North Carolina's Omarion Hampton was pretty universally considered as the clear number 2 back in the class behind Ashton Jeanty. Just looks like an NFL running back at 6 foot 220 pounds, but has really sweet feet at that size, and excellent feel as his own runner to allow things to develop and get the momentum going downhill. Capable of using his speed to gain the corner against linebackers, but then runs behind his pads and chucks through would-be tacklers, along with having an impressive top gear. And he's fully willing to step up for linebackers, accelerating into contact as blitzers, and packs plenty of striking power as a personal protector. Hampton has improved his pacing as he's pressing the front side of concepts, and it looks closed down initially, but he still has room to be more diligent with allowing creases to develop, where he was too eager to use his speed to get wide, and I wouldn't call him an overly creative runner or anything more than an outlet in the passing game with some clap attack tendencies. Meaning he's not as complete as Jeanty or a few other guys maybe, but for what Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman will ask of him, which is be a sledgehammer in the run game, to take pressure off Justin Herbert, make the play-action game all the more effective, rather than getting in as many dropback settings and contribute some protection, I believe he has a chance to be a big-time producer right away, with another former first-rounder to learn from in Najee Harris, who they brought away in free agency, but doesn't have the same kind of explosiveness. Trey Harris from Ole Miss is a powerful 6'2", 205-pound wideout who eats a lot of grass with those long strides and has improved his ability to reduce his shoulder in order to elude contact, as well as drop his way to great separation on stop routes. He uses his body really well as a shield between the ball and nearby defenders with that alpha mentality in contested situations, and he becomes a running back when the ball's in his hands with the mindset, field vision, and usage of his off-arm to be effective. Harris doesn't show much detail at all in his releases and setting up the breakpoint of routes, where it was so many hitches versus off coverage or vertical stuff, and he'll occasionally drop passes where he's already more focused on the closest defender and what he'll do after the catch. So not necessarily the type of receiver I might have expected to be paired up with Herbert, who wins a lot of precision and timing, but he did have some moments of making the final first-round pick of the previous regime work in Quentin Johnson. This guy can be a better version of that, with more reliability as a vertical target, capable of truly winning at the catch point. Jamari Caldwell from Oregon was one of my favorite D tackles in the class. A dancing bear at 6'2", 335 pounds, who is built like a true nose with a torso of a wooden barrel and plenty of junk in the trunk. Shockingly quick off the ball for a man of his dimensions, and can extend those arms to knock back solo blockers on the interior, as well as range out against wide zone runs. While as a pass rusher, he pairs that great first step with much better short area quickness than you'd anticipate for his frame, and showed more creativity previously at Houston in that regard, before having to do a lot of the dirty work with the Ducks this past season. He could be a little quicker with deconstructing blocks, turning his shoulders, and pursuing the ball down the line, and he has sub-average arm length, which too often allows pass protectors to get into his chest, and occasionally leads to him losing track of the football. I thought for a team with guys like Tahir Tard, Deshaun Hand, and Scott Medlock as part of that rotation alongside Otito Bonia, who was the one guy who kind of stood out last year, they needed some more flash, and Caldwell can not only deal with traffic, but also give him more range at the nose and dynamism if you can tap into the flashes that he showed on passing downs in 2023. I like this a lot, and this was right around the range where I valued the player. Kyle Kennard from South Carolina brings that long frame on the edge at 6'4", 255 pounds, with 34-inch arms, and consistently makes sure to keep the outside shoulder free. He aims his pass and accelerates into pulling guards to not allow any knockback on kickouts, and he gets off the ball with a purpose to put heat on the quarterback with a wide array of hand combats to win the outside shoulder and the ankle strength to drive for contact. His long build don't work in Kennard's favor when he's trying to anchor against tackles with a bit of a runway to him and wider alignments especially, and he needs to develop some inside counters in order to take his game to the next level, and doesn't actually step past the hip of blockers when he does cross their face to where they can ride Kennard into the guard. Kind of an up and down evaluation, where it can look good if he's a step ahead of tackles in his approach, but also struggles to really generate pressure against some NFL quality guys that he faced. I thought there were better outside linebackers available, especially considering you'd think defensive coordinator Jesse Mintze would probably like to drop those guys into coverage to some degree as part of the simulated pressures on third downs, which Kennard only did 4 times all of last season. But I do like the idea of these next 2 pass catchers, first with Keandre Lambert-Smith from Auburn, 6'1", 190-pound wideout who's slippery off the line and has 4.37 speed that the defense has to respect, offers the play strength to deal with contact early in the route or at the catch point, consistently plucking the ball away from his frame with those long arms, and has some pretty good juice after the catch, not taking too much time to gear up, didn't fumble once in his career, and he gets after it in the run game with a hefty initial strike as a blocker. He sort of telegraphs routes, breaking back towards the quarterback, instead of really pushing up and falling down to create separation, and he has improved in that area, but will occasionally still drop passes that don't arrive perfectly, and he allows it to get into his body, leading to drops. While Aronda Gadsden from Syracuse is this 6'4", 245-pound power slot basically, although his inline rates did finally live up more to the title of tight end this past season, who did a lot of his damage on seams, benders, and deep over routes. He's a natural hands catcher who doesn't wait for the ball to get to him, holding several tough diving and contested grabs, while having the speed and more strength than you might expect after the catch. As a blocker, his ability to glide up to defenders and choose his angles in space well to wall off defensive backs from the slots is where he's best. Gadsden simply doesn't have the functional mass, pop in his hands, or ferocity in his game to really give you anything as an inline run blocker near the point of attack, and he's generally upright in his routes, where he lacks some short area quickness to consistently separate out of his breaks, too often adding a couple of extra steps. These are 2 guys who really stood out during Shrine Bowl week with their ability to get open and finish challenging catches, both not fully formed yet, but have already shown plenty of growth and could be long-term pieces to diversify his receiving corps. Neither Will Dissly nor Tyler Conklin is keeping me from putting Gadsden on the field in obvious passing downs, although those guys of course will heavily factor into the run game. I'll be interested to see if they find packages for them this year, and especially in 2026. 1 pick before we hit the 200 mark, and the others beyond that I'll quickly run through still. Branson Taylor from Pittsburgh is a hulking left tackle at 6'6", 320 pounds, with a wide chest and an 82-inch wingspan, who connects his upper and lower half to take care of base blocks. He shows a solid initial kick, and is just so damn wide to get around in the passing game, with the grip strength to snatch up rushers if they get too close to him. But he has a tendency of dipping his head into contact in both the run and pass game, and is still learning the nuances of hand placement after the initial interaction, and maximizing his control in rushing plays, while overextending occasionally in passing situations. Someone I got to very late in the process, but I thought definitely had some redeeming qualities, and as great as the starting tackle tandem of first-round picks is, I'm sure this coaching staff doesn't really ever want to put Trey Pipkins back out there, so this could be a swing guy for the next few years. RJ Mickens, the Clemson safety, is urgent to become the second layer of the run fit, coming from depth, keeping the shoulder square as he deciphers the action inside, while taking excellent angles to cut off the corner and perimeter plays. He's an instinctive zone defender with good awareness for pre-snap tells and different rules based on how the pattern develops, but also confident to anticipate and jump breaks of slot receivers in man coverage. Mickens gets sucked up excessively with regularity and clears up rushing lanes that way, as the runner sticks his foot in the ground underneath him, and he doesn't profile as a great option in the high post, not consistently staying deeper than the deepest. But a safety whose missed tackles I can get on board with, thanks to how he's able to impact plays early, be that kamikaze-style player, and line up extensively in the slots in big nickel packages. Unless they move one of last year's rookies inside due to the addition of Conti Jackson at corner in place of Asante Samuel Jr., that could be a regular grouping for them, where Mickens' addition could free up Derwin James to move around even more. And finally, Triquez Bridges, the other Florida corner I guess, along with Jason Marshall, who went to Miami early in round 5. I wasn't aware that he was actually part of this class, nor did he stand out to me in any meaningful way, which I don't love closing out the series with a player that I didn't study, But as I've always said, I'm not going to BS you guys and have delivered plenty of in-depth analysis to where I don't have to feel too bad for not having done work on player 256 selected. So just some numbers here. Started 24 of 61 career games, not truly established himself through 5 seasons at Oregon, before transferring to the Gators for 2024, where he was this multifaceted rotational player in the secondary, 6'2", 200 pounds, over 33-inch arms, and 4.45 speed, and does have some solid ball production in his 2 seasons of significant usage, with 5 picks and 16 PBUs combined. A bet on the physical profile and some of the potential he's flashed, I guess, who will have to prove himself on special teams. Which altogether, I thought this was most of a so-so draft. Love what Hampton represents for an offense that wanted to change how the wind was blowing, away from putting so much on quarterback Justin Herbert, but with how inefficient and the dynamism they were lacking on the ground, that's what it ultimately ended up being again, and it was a rough exit against the Texans in the wildcard rounds. The dude's a sledgehammer with sweet feet and breakaway speed. Trey Harris adds some more physicality and speed to the receiver room as well, while Jamari Caldwell gives that defensive interior a little bit of a different feel, with a great combination of immediate impact and potential. Take it or leave it with the Kennard selection in the 4th. I like what those 2 pass catchers after that could be. You might have found the swing tackle and 3rd safety. I can see a path where this class helps them for where they ultimately want to go. But for as strong as the edge class was, did I think they approached it optimally? Or did they miss a couple of opportunities to avoid being left out at runs, where they might have been able to maneuver around the board, considering what they'll have on the roster next year? And I like taking shots at pass catchers, but unclear right now how that room comes together. They just kinda ended up sticking and picking without any majorly wrong or great that they did, as the only name who might end up significantly outplaying his draft slots. Which one more time brings us to the draft rankings for the division overall in the AFC West. Not great news for the 3 other teams, but I'll have to put the Chiefs at the top. I just thought the first 2 selections with Josh Simmons and Omar Norman-Lott are guys other teams were a little hesitant to invest into, coming off the knee injury for the former and due to the limited snap total for the latter, but could both end up being studs with their profiles. They got themselves a physical boundary corner, a steal of a receiver with great yak skills, what I believe might be a starting linebacker, and a dynamic receiving back at the very least. There was basically only one pick that I didn't think came at equal or surplus value, and they easily made up for it with a couple of others. That's trouble for the rest of the AFC. The Raiders are next for me, and kind of have become a team I'm more willing to buy into than most people out there. Looking at the offseason, bringing in Pete Carroll and trading for Geno Smith to reunite those two, they haven't operated in a way that you'd think, for what some may label as a team in transition, getting Ashton Jeanty to spearhead rushing attack, and immediate contributor at receiver in Jack Bash, Darian Porter being the most Carroll corner ever, along with taking multiple steps at the O-line, interior D-line, and potentially even quarterback, even with more so as a backup. I have my eyes on these guys to surprise some people this year, and I like the future prospects of a couple of more developmental prospects that are also included here. And then I don't want to be a cop-out, but I went with another tie at number 3. First, the Chargers, who as I said previously, were sort of unspectacular, even though not bad by any means. Really like how they invested into more skill position talent around Justin Herbert. Jamari Caldwell in round 3 as a dancing bear nose tackle has a place in my heart, and nothing there did it wrong here. Just didn't think Kyle Kennard was the type of edge that they needed in round 4, when they should have addressed that position more so in general this offseason. And although I'm a big RJ Mickens fan at the end of round 6, they should have probably prioritized the secondary a little bit more, especially at corner, where at best they just kinda keep throwing darts at it. And finally, the Broncos, although looking at the league as a whole this way, maybe slightly below average in what they did. Initially I was going to put them 4th to dock them for having a punter and a basketball player basically, trying to become a tight end with the final 2 selections. But overall, I was just more surprised with their approach at continuing to fortify their defense, which makes sense when I reflect on how they need to continue their success against those true contenders. I love RJ Harvey as that multifaceted weapon for Sean Payton to play with. And as I said, I think he views Pat Bryant as more of a Michael Thomas type for an otherwise really small wide receiver room outside of Cortland Sutton. Plus the draft included an awesome plus value trade in round 2. But that wraps up the most extensive video series of the entire year, all 32 draft classes and rosters discussed over the last month. Thank you so much for watching this video, and any of the others you've had a chance to check out. Feel free to head over to the playlist that I created for all of the divisions, where again you'll find timestamps for the individual teams if you're interested in any specific ones. What did you think of this video or series altogether? Was there anything you disagreed with or have further questions about? Happy to discuss any of those topics in the comment section. And feel free to make your claim for who you think might take the AFC West crown away from the Chiefs this upcoming season. One more time, if you want to learn even more about the newest players of these 4 teams and a bunch of others, I have detailed scouting reports on like 130 draft prospects and plenty of other content over on my website, hellosforfootballtalk.com. Links to that and my social media channels are down below in the video description. Whether you joined recently or have been a subscriber for a long time, I really appreciate you guys being part of this, and I hope to keep you around for the rest of the off-season. Always happy to listen to any content suggestions, but I have some fun ideas in the works, and there won't be any of the meaningless back and forth you might see in the major TV channels. Which next week, that'll be very much connected to what we've talked about here over the last month plus. A written piece on the most improved position groups this off-season. That'll be over on my site once more. So, until then, see you later. Peace!